This is Thinkenergy, the podcast that helps you better understand the fast-changing world of energy through conversations with game changers, industry leaders, and influencers. So join me, Dan Séguin, as I explore both traditional and unconventional facets of the energy industry. Hey everyone, welcome back. Today's show is going to be a little different. This is a bittersweet episode of the Thinkenergy podcast. Today marks the end of an era for me on this incredible journey through the world of energy. It's been an honor and a privilege to share stories, insights, and innovations with all of you these many years on the show. But as they say, all good things must come to an end. Today, I'm excited to introduce you to the new captain steering this ship into the future, someone who is just as passionate and knowledgeable about the energy sector than I am, maybe a little more so. Without further ado, please join me in welcoming your new host of the Thinkenergy podcast, Trevor Freeman. Trevor, welcome to the show.
Thanks very much, Dan, and thanks for having me on and entrusting me with this project. I just want to start by recognizing all the hard work that you and your team have put into building Thinkenergy into what it is today. It's a great community of listeners who are enthusiastic and curious about all things energy related. I've really enjoyed following along, and I'm thrilled to be joining the Thinkenergy team as we continue to explore this dynamic and ever-changing world of energy at this really critical time in our industry.
Trevor, for our listeners, perhaps you can tell us about yourself, your expertise in the energy sector. In short, what is your role now and how did you get here?
Sure. So I'm an environmental engineer who has been in the sustainability and energy field for about 14 years now. Right when I graduated out of university, I spent about 4 years working in international development and water and sanitation. But on coming back home to Canada, I decided to explore this passion for sustainability and environmental improvement. And I made the shift to working in green building design and energy management. I worked in consulting and helping building owners, primarily commercial real estate, improve their buildings, reduce energy consumption and costs, and incorporate sustainable thinking into their day-to-day business operations. I joined Hydro Ottawa about 8 years ago now, first working on our conservation and demand management team, before making the jump over to our key accounts team, which I now lead. As the leader of the key accounts team, we support some of our largest commercial customers with all things related to energy. We're here to be their trusted advisors, whether that's routine questions or access to various services that Hydro Ottawa offers, or looking ahead as more and more of our customers start to plan their own decarbonization or energy transition pathways. It's really a great role that helps my team and I really understand the needs and drivers of our customers, which are ultimately the end users of the energy that gets talked about on this podcast so often. That understanding helps Hydro Ottawa plan to meet the needs of those customers moving forward.
Okay, aside from fame and fortune, what drew you to take on this role of hosting the podcast?
Well, I mean, since I can't talk about the first two, which are really the main drivers, in addition to being an engineer, I'm actually really passionate about communicating complex items. I know the term good communication is not always associated with engineers, and I'm allowed to make that joke, but I really do enjoy having, those tough conversations about complex and technical topics, whether that's how the grid works, to the changing landscape and technologies associated with energy, to simply how does your electricity bill work or how does a building mechanical system work. I really enjoy having those conversations, and this seems like a great opportunity. So that, plus seeing all the great conversations you've been able to have over the past years with some really fantastic folks who are doing really great things, made it an easy decision to step into the role when the opportunity arose.
Very cool. Trevor, sorry, but I'm going to put you on the spot here. Do you have any favorite episodes of the Thinkenergy podcast that resonate with you?
Sure. I'm actually going to cheat here, Dan, and give you 3, but I promise I'll be quick. So the first one is an episode that you did about residential heat pumps with our mutual colleague, Sean Carr. So I'm a little bit biased in this one because not only do I know Sean's story very well, but I actually went through my own heat pump journey about 4 years ago when I installed a hybrid heating system at my own house. And I think the more we talk about the benefits and the challenges of electrifying home heating, the easier we make that step for everyone else who's going to be doing it as well. The second one I'm going to pick is your interview with Hydro Ottawa's CEO, Bryce Conrad, about our own net zero ambitions as an organization. So folks can go back and listen for themselves, but as a member of the Hydro Ottawa team, I was really inspired by the ambition and the drive to be a leader and commit to something bold and lofty, even though we don't necessarily have all the answers about exactly how we're going to get there. And finally, I really loved your conversation with Dr. Monica Gattinger about the conversation we need to have around the future of energy, specifically her positive energy program. As someone who's really passionate about taking action around climate change, I'm all too aware that as much as we finally seem to be getting some consensus that climate change is indeed a problem, there's still a lot of polarizing views about how to address the issue and how fast to move. Dr. Gattinger's work on building consensus and having a constructive dialogue was really refreshing to hear and made me really optimistic about where we can go with this.
Cool. Okay. Now, what excites you about the future of energy?
Yeah, I think this is a really great time to be in the energy field. Things feel like they're changing rapidly, and it seems like we're on the cusp of a real evolution of how we power our lives and our society, whether it's what kind of energy we use, clean energy versus emissions producing energy, where that energy comes from, centrally produced versus distributed, and how much control over that energy the end users, so that's the homes and the businesses, have through things like self-generation and storage and smart technology. And that's not even talking about how that smart technology and AI is going to impact all of the above. So above all, I think I'm really excited to be working in an industry that's really one of the major tools we have as a society to combat climate change. Electricity, while not the only answer, is a major avenue for decarbonization, and I really love being a part of that.
Okay, Trevor, are there any topics or themes from your experience that you'd like to explore further on the show? What can our listeners expect?
Honestly, Dan, I hope it's more of the same as what you've been doing over these past years. So that's talking to smart folks who are doing really cool things in the energy industry, especially around decarbonization and the energy transition. That includes helping demystify some of those more complex topics for our listeners. How does this big machine that we call the electricity grid in the energy industry, how does that all work and what does it mean for our consumers? And then getting into the weeds on the energy transition, whether that's specific technologies or policy ideas, or more likely a mix of the both, because you really can never have one without the other.
Very cool. Thanks, Trevor.
Thank you, Dan. So I think this is the part where I get to take over. Now, your listeners will know that you've been sitting behind the microphone for a number of years now, but I don't think anybody has ever interviewed you. So let's take this opportunity to ask you a couple questions. So first of all, I was thinking maybe you could take us back to the beginning and tell us what inspired you to start this podcast.
Well, our first podcast, for those who don't remember, was released in May of 2019. The topic was microgeneration. Wow. We explored the possibility back then of turning your home into your own virtual power plant. Now, the reason why we dove into podcasting was driven by the fact that we were looking for a product, a platform that could help demystify, maybe better understand the fast-changing world of energy. We were looking for a product where we could maybe better shape the narrative. By leveraging influencers and subject matter experts, it provided us with a greater ability, if you want, to maximize the reach of the podcast, but also its amplification. Also, working with a captive audience, like-minded people, is much easier. Finally, another reason we gravitated to podcasting was to deal with infobesity. Great term here. Cluster and noise on channels is constantly increasing and customer attention span is shrinking. So podcasts were convenient and very easy to consume. They're portable. You can listen to them in the gym, drive to work, or even on a plane. So it was a great choice for us to do, and it worked very well. Now, if I look back 5 years, I think that podcasts have been extremely sticky. This long-form content basically had a great listen rate. And for us, I think we did good.
Great. Thanks, Dan. I can tell already that I've got a lot to learn on the communication side of things and marketing, what we do here. On the podcast, do you have a favorite moment or more than one from doing the show that you want to share, or a favorite episode, or something that really stands out and encapsulates the essence of Thinkenergy?
So you're asking me to pick my favorite child. That's a tough one. Okay, well, I think the one that comes into mind is the episode with a disaster volunteer from the Canadian Red Cross. As we all know, we've experienced a pandemic, a number of natural disasters in the last couple of years. Devastating windstorms, tornadoes, hurricanes, freezing rain, forest fires, and floods. And when disaster strikes, electricity supply is usually jeopardized. So during these large-scale emergencies, emergency response becomes critical. And in this interview, we explored what it's like to be a Canadian Red Cross volunteer with boots on the ground during a disaster. It's a very cool episode.
Over the past number of years of doing this, what has been the most significant change or changes and developments in the energy sector that you've seen?
I think it's the acknowledgement of reducing our environmental footprint, the commitment to provide innovative, sustainable solutions, things like achieving net zero operations. Also, climate change coupled with the push for electrification is now driving a lot of innovation and change in our sector. What comes to mind is that greater push towards renewable energy, expanding access to EV infrastructure, zero emission with public transit. There's a lot going on. And let's not forget the evolution of customers. They are no longer passive consumers of electricity. Some of them are now becoming prosumers, managing, generating, and selling their energy. So the energy landscape is in a constant flux, and it's going to be an exciting ride.
So as I sit here behind the microphone on this side of the desk, what advice do you have for me taking on this podcast around that ever-evolving world of energy?
This is not going to be long-winded. Always make sure the content provides value for the audience. You must be audience-driven. Be curious and have fun. That's it.
Perfect. Sounds easy. So Dan, as you step away from hosting, what comes next? Are we going to be competing for podcast listeners, or what's in your future?
Not at all. I'll be spending a lot more time with my wife. I'm going to continue my karate journey. I'm going to master pickleball, my word. I want to do bike rail trails across Canada and the US. And I'm looking forward to joining the ever-growing generation of snowbirds in Florida while renovating my condo in Naples and enjoying the beach.
As long as you put some solar on that condo, Dan, I think that sounds like an awesome plan. So finally, just to wrap it all up, again, our regular listeners will know that you have subjected your guests to some on-the-spot rapid-fire questions. And again, I don't think you've ever answered them yourselves. So I think it's time that we get to hear what your answers to those questions would be. So, are you ready?
I am.
Here we go. What are you reading right now?
Right now I'm reading Forever Young by Dr. Gabriel Lyon. It's a book on strategies for aging well.
Sounds appropriate given your coming retirement. So, what would you name your boat if you had one? And do you have one?
I do not. I used to have a pontoon boat when I lived by the lake, but I would call it now, I think, Gilligan.
Who is someone that you admire?
Hands down, my life partner, my better half, France, my wife.
I know that if I'd have asked you to name two people, I would have been number two.
Oh, absolutely.
I know that, like many of us, you are probably guilty of watching a lot more Netflix and streaming platforms over the last number of years. So what's your favorite movie or show?
Okay, well, the best Netflix series, hands down, is Peaky Blinders. And for me, the best movies, I'll go with 3. The Godfather, Memento, and Lock, Stock, and Two Smoking Barrels.
Well, Dan, I think we've reached the end of this transition episode of the Think Energy podcast. Thanks again for pulling me in and entrusting this with me. And thanks for sharing a little bit about your life with us today.
Very cool. Thank you very much.
And finally, what excites you about the energy industry right now?
Well, I think I alluded to this earlier. I think what's exciting me is seeing how the electricity grid, how utilities across North America will cope with the millions of EVs. Should be interesting.
You'll have to come back in, Dan, and check in on things in a year or two when we've got it all figured out, no doubt. So, Dan, I think that's it. I think we've reached the end of this transition episode of the Think Energy podcast. Thanks again for having me on, for entrusting this with me, and for sharing a little bit about your insights and your life with us on this episode.
Thank you, Trevor. There you have it, folks. Thank you all for being part of this amazing community. And I look forward to tuning in now as a listener from now on. This is Dan Séguin signing off and passing the microphone over to Mr. Trevor Freeman.
Thanks, Dan. It's been a pleasure.
Thanks for tuning in for another episode of the Think Energy podcast. Don't forget to subscribe and leave us a review wherever you're listening. And to find out more about today's guest or previous episodes, visit thinkenergypodcast.com. I hope you'll join us again next time as we spark even more conversations about the energy of tomorrow.